Good evening, everyone.
How's everybody doing tonight?
Oh man, I'm excited. I've got a conversation with a friend of ours, Dr. Nicole Amada, or Nikki.
Yes.
And she is with us, and we are going to just get loose with this conversation in a minute. I can't wait for it, but I love it. I'm so psyched.
Weird is the best.
Yeah. So Nikki is familiar with what we do here. And
That's good.
When I first ran across Nikki, we actually met through a mutual friend in a networking group that is really one of my favorites. And Tom, you know which one that is, but
yeah,
so I was an introduction of a friend. And so Nikki's a friend of a friend, and good Lord, do I like it when my friends have very cool friends like this.
Oh, it's the best.
So I'm not going to waste any time, man. We're just going to get into this. So let's set the on-ramp like this. How'd you get here?
Who are you?
Beautiful. Well, how I got here specifically was exactly what you said. Yes, absolutely. Just connection. And really, I feel like when, you step into what you are meant to be doing, what you should be doing, and you show up like that in your relationships, it just happens. You just happen to connect, right, with people that are very familiar and unfamiliar at the same time, and who want to engage and dive deep and talk about the things that really matter. Professionally speaking, how I got here, so I'm a PhD. I have my doctorate in cognitive psychology primarily, but with a specific focus on cognitive development. And it's pretty niche, specifically on self-referential cognition. So identity, but more so from the perspective of neuroscience. Where does our sense of self come from? What are the foundations of self and identity? And then understanding the relationship between identity and how we make meaning and write story about selfhood and our relationship with the world and our environment and other people, and well-being. So my field is eudaemonic psychology, eudaemonic well-being. Really a long history all the way back to Socrates and ancient Greece, what is the highest good? But then more so in, the late 1900s, really kind of moving centralized really on Maslow and his humanistic perspective of psychology, the pyramid of self-actualization and hierarchical needs. And
we've only referenced that about 4 million times.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. Also
exactly.
Anybody at home, straightforward stuff right off the bat. You're very approachable.
Yeah.
Right.
This is casual reading on a Saturday.
No,
for
that's
most
why.
high
Oh my gosh,
seniors.
that's what I love though about
totally.
this area is that it really is. It's very scientific. It can develop a really concrete relationship with what we're uncovering and understanding in neuroscience, and as our technology develops, and we're able to map out what the mind looks like in the active brain, we're able to understand more and more what underpins self-consciousness and what underpins identity. And that's where, a lot of mystery lies. And the evolution of the field, I think, is more and more closing the gap between humanistic psychology and neuroscience, which, theoretically seem to be antithetical. But again, when you don't take those, kind of the theoretical assumptions at face value, you're able to see, crossover.
So there is like mountains to unpack here. I'm not even
I don't know.
Tom,
it seems pretty straightforward to me, man.
I think
we're wrapping up for the night.
Yeah.
I heard Maslow and something else. I don't. After that, I was gone.
So Nikki, this is what I love. Let's start out with like the part that I find interesting about anybody who does this level of dive on any topic, right? You tonight, but more broadly speaking. And this leads to a question after it is, this is such a deep, narrow hole that you crawled into, right?
Yeah,
Like
for
it
sure.
goes on, and we don't know how deep it is even. Obviously, you made allusions to that. But somebody on a networking thing, you said something on the way in too. Somebody on a networking call, I went on there the other day and we jumped on and we had like 91 LinkedIn connections in common. And that's not very often. I mean, usually I'll see like high 30s, high 40s, whatever, but 91 seemed excessive, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, and they were from people at all stages of my life, early career, early started my business, this business, that business, like this networking group, that, I mean, they spanned 2 decades, right? So this wasn't like, I knew him from this group. And I made a comment somewhat flippantly. I was like, man, how the hell did we never meet? And his answer really was super clear. It's like, it wasn't our time.
Wow.
It was just as simple as that. Like, basically, like, yeah, okay, we had everything in the world, every reason we could have done this. We had every opportunity to do it, but we didn't because it wasn't our time. How much of what you're studying right now in this, and people like yourself, do you think that we had all these ingredients before to learn all this stuff? We just wasn't the time to do it. Versus how much of this is like we have new hardware or tools that are allowing us to dive this deep? Like where reflect on that if you could.
In that same way, Matt has said before, every element that's ever existed has been in the universe since the beginning of the time. We're just combining it differently. And I think that's kind of, he's taking the psycho-spiritual route now, I think.
Yeah, well, I'm just curious because, like, we've been talking about the brain for decades, right? For centuries. I mean, that's not new, right?
I like the Chinese perspective that it's just a sea of marrow. It's in a big bone.
Yeah, it's just a big bone.
No, what you guys are alluding to, it's interesting. The neuroscience definition or conceptualization of creativity is the novel combination of existing information to be useful and appropriate. And that is how I think about where we are at in psychology and neuroscience and transpersonal psychology. I think as we have access to more information, generally, and with our instruments and our measurements, we have a plethora of data points that we have never yet been able to combine in new and interesting and intriguing combinations. And I think that's, in essence, a representation of not just human consciousness, but of nature. Nature is creating novel combinations until it gets it right over and over and over again. And, that's where I see psychology going. Same direction.
Wow, that's crazy, because I feel like then the next question is, does nature have consciousness? Yeah. As a whole thing.
Yeah. I think
Sorry, no one smoked anything yet, right?
As an
maybe that was a little bit, maybe I jumped the gun there.
Yeah. Tom, get back to us in about 25 minutes.
Give us 25 minutes.
Right.
A bag of Funyuns.
Please pause for a note from our sponsors.
No, I think, epistemologically, it depends just how you're looking at it, right? I think there are different worldview lenses to play with. And that's what I think is what it means to be an expansive thinker, is to be able to put on different lenses, look through different frameworks of understanding, and being able to compare and contrast. So if we're using, the lens of, everything is conscious and everything has consciousness, that's one way to look at the universe and to look at our relationship to it. If we want to create a kind of division, a kind of duality, and say, okay, we have objects and observers, right? That's another way to look at reality. It just depends on what pair of glasses we're putting on and willing to put on.
So let's skip to the finish line to come back, to set a stage to come back to where we are. We find out tomorrow the underpinnings of all of this stuff, right? All the answers fall out of the sky in the morning and we all have all the answers. To what end are we studying this through your lens, like what's the desired knowledge that we're getting out of it? Like, what can I do with that information once I have it?
Well, it depends on what you're referring to. If you're referring to being able to understand your own unique psyche and inner workings and wirings, then the end goal is to be as autonomous as possible in your life, to be as mindful and self-directed as possible in your existence. If you're
But that's
talking about,
presuming that you actually are able to integrate and execute on that new knowledge rather than ignore it like most people probably will.
But
Right.
is this what I guess Buddhists and Hindus and to some degree Taoists would call enlightenment? Is that what we're talking about here, or is this a very different self-actualization?
No. Yeah, we're so towards the end of Maslow's life, right? He kind of alluded to this potential that self-actualization is not necessarily the highest kind of apex well-being state, that it's actually in self-transcendence, right? And so towards the end of his life, he started to kind of revise his theory and talk about self-transcendence.
Mm-hmm.
Self-actualization, it is contingent on individual identity.
Okay.
It's, where the Buddhist philosophy is more so going beyond
Mm-hmm.
the individual self and embodying a sense of pure awareness, which is essentially an unfiltered awareness, the filter being the self.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's what, we can bridge over to psychedelics here and talk about how, throughout our life in our cortical systems gets ingrained all of our experience, notion of self, belief of self, and that gets essentially imposed on our experience and becomes the filter through which we experience ourselves in the world. And when we have even a temporary suspension and release and malleability in that, we can experience a sense of closeness to the moment, to reality that we're usually not able to access because of this very active, very top-down interpretation of ourselves in the world constantly through our experiences. So I think we have one aspect of self-actualization that is personal and autobiographical, that is to master ourselves and free ourselves from the chains of prior adopted beliefs. And then we have the transcendence of that, which is, going beyond the personal and truly feeling in an embodied way a direct connection to reality in the present moment.
But so I guess where I was going with that a little bit was about people skipping over it is, and this like kind of bridges to the psychedelic part. I mean, I think one of the things about psychedelic use for my own life that has greased the groove, if you will, is that once you get out of that, when you suspend that temporarily, you create a space to actually see the label from outside the jar rather than from inside. You can't see the label from inside the jar, but you almost kind of go outside of the jar real quick. You can see now what you're dealing with. And then when you go back in the jar, it's not like a secret anymore, right? Like you're like, all right, I know what's on the other side. Now I can act on it. But like in order to do that, we've used different words for it, integration therapy and stuff, like we actually fold it in on integrating it literally into your workflow, if you will, your life, right? If you don't actually do that, and I think Nikki, you and I talked about this a couple of weeks ago when we talked, but like integration is like a real big part of like these kind of movements. So I guess if I move without integrating, or if I try to integrate something without doing the movement, I don't know. Like, I mean, am I finding anything? Like, is what I'm finding even worth finding? You know what I mean? Like, it's sort of like I need both sides of this equation to like make it work. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think in a lot of ways, insight without integration goes one of two ways. It either goes in ego inflation, where we go, oh my gosh, I have all the answers, I am Jesus walking on water, or it goes in the opposite direction, where we go, I'm now fully aware of all of my maladaptive components, and I have no idea what to do with it. So I'm just going to dissociate and suppress like I've always done. Where what integration really is meant to do is take the awareness and work with awareness and insight actively and identify with mindfulness in everyday life the way that our defenses come to the table and try to pull us and mask us from that insight that we've already gained in our psychedelic experience. So if we're not doing the integration, where we're not trying to cut out the weeds of the previously adopted ways of coping with this truth about ourselves that we've already known and have just bolstered and defended against, we fall usually right back into the same patterns, or potentially even stronger into those patterns, because again, we feel potentially even a deeper level of shame from not acting on the awareness that we have.
Right. So that's interesting. Okay. So I guess let's talk about the non-assisted version of that for a second, right? No substances or compounds of any kind. I joke a lot about saying I got to do 85 things in the morning now just to not fall apart during the day. And it's like meditation and stretching and this and that and the other. I kind of feel like maybe those are my sort of non-compound related ways of opening that door to see that clarity. You know what I mean? Like when I meditate, for example, right? Like that could open up sort of an awareness. And I think in the more you do those things, I think the less, at least for me personally, it's gotten the ego inflation side, aside from starting a podcast to get to talk about this every Thursday, aside from that part, the ego inflation part kind of tamps down, because you're like, all right, well, this isn't an ego thing. Like I have the tools to recognize that this is just me doing what I need to do to move to another space.
So two things here. So we all have an ego, and learning to live with the ego is essential. It's not about suppressing the ego and rejecting the ego's wants and desires and defenses. It's about cultivating enough space within your own consciousness that it's not the driver. Right. So that's great.
That's a much better way of putting it. Correct.
Yeah. That's a big kind of point of integration. The other thing that I think is an important thing to bring forward here is that when we feel that we have some kind of deep insight about ourselves, our relationship to our understanding of ourselves is much more important than the actual understanding of ourselves. The way that we move with that understanding is the mediator between our sense of self and our well-being. So if we come to understand something about ourselves and we believe in some way that makes us superior or inferior to other people or the norm, or what is kind of average and expected, that, even though we don't realize it, is also playing into the game of the ego. The ego is always in hierarchy. The primitive mind and the sense of self that is ingrained in our primitive nature in the body, it's always looking for better or worse, good, bad. It's always operating in duality. And what it means to integrate means to be able to transcend that duality and that way of thinking about ourselves, and be able to cultivate enough space within ourselves to hold both and all things as potentially equally true, and then deciding actively what kind of self experience we want to cultivate.
Interesting. So I guess jumping around here a little bit, because I kind of want to go on the other side of this, right? When you go into the compound assisted side, right? I think a lot of people's hesitation to try this, I think there's two things. One, and I was just talking about this with somebody the other day. It was like funny because I hadn't really thought about this before, but I'm 48. When I was 18, if you told somebody you were going to do mushrooms, acid, ecstasy, anything like that. Like those were like bad drugs. Maybe not as bad as heroin, but they were bad. You know what I mean? Like,
and Nancy Reagan was around when we were younger, by the way. So that's why I just need to throw that in there. Jesus. Just say no was a thing.
Chat, that was the most popularly failured program in the
apparently
history of the world.
She was loved in Hollywood, but that's for a different reason.
I mean, I grew up in the DARE program, so I'm
right. But here's the thing, though, like, what are the two biggest hallmarks of a good trip or a great experience? It's mindset and your setting, right? And if your mindset is like, I am doing a heavily fucked up narcotic, it's a hard on-ramp to kind of, get over, right? So somebody like myself who's gotten over it, I'd be lying if I didn't tell you every time I engage, there's like a piece of me and it's getting smaller and farther in the back of my mind that's going, don't do it, man, it's bad. don't do it, man. And like that's gotta niggle away at people. And like for the people who can't get over it, like I feel like there's this like incompatibility almost.
Nikki, is that a part of the duality of the ego
right
there?
Is that part of this?
Absolutely. Right? It's absolutely. There's two shame-based approaches to using these substances. The first is the internalized story of what they are. These things are bad, you're going to go crazy, XYZ. And the other internalized narrative of you're going to lose control. Right. And actually, the former plays on the latter, right? That we're told this story, and especially in Western society, we're told this story that the highest, form of like functionality and productivity and success is how much can you control? Can you control yourself? Can you control your well-being? Can you control your life? The more that you're in control, the more adaptive you are. And this is a joke. This is an absolute joke. That
I mean, I think anything that probably sinks more ships.
Is that different than say self-discipline? Is this equivalent to that?
So control is different from discipline. Discipline has a little bit more malleability. Discipline allows for more surrender because discipline appropriately does require surrender. Control is compulsive. It's fear-based. It's anxiety-based. It's, I don't want to feel bad. I don't want to feel bad. I don't want to be unhealthy. Right? And so it's operating from a place of deficit, where discipline can operate from deficit, but it can also operate from abundance, right? I want to do this for myself because the inherent reward feels good for me, And so with these experiences, with psychedelic experiences, the main reason why there's, I think, a massive stigma around them is not just what's socially and culturally cultivated the story around them, but also about shared experiences where human beings have evolved, right, to have more and more control, more and more choice, more and more self-regulation, and we're so attached to it. We are so attached to it. It's what we think is the highest apex form of intelligence and adaptivity. But, these experiences, they challenge us in the most deeply spiritual ways in this way. These experiences say, can you let go? Can you let go and surrender and accept that you are not in control? If you can let your ego die, your life after will be richer, more present, more fulfilling, because you're no longer so attached to what the ego has convinced you is so direly important, which is mostly about control and mostly about perception.
So now I've got to follow up on that because of the number of people I know that have done, let's say they'll go do the psychedelic weekend, they'll do the integration, and they say, oh, my ego died. And you're talking to them and you're like, you're still a fucking prick. Like there's still like, no, it has not, and maybe that's my ego going, no, there's no fucking way. But, what happens there? I mean, in that instant, when that ego death happens during a trip, is that a true ego death, or is that just like a chink in the armor? You know, is that just a little like?
Yeah. I mean, I'd be lying if I said I knew the answer to, for every
Okay.
person and what that is. But
Yeah.
I'd say the old, saying is true that, the person who is the loudest, right? Or even just like the verbalization, like even just saying like, oh my gosh, like my ego has died and now I am this, humble creature. It precludes the essence of what it means to be that, right? That the person that comes back and their ego has truly died and they're truly integrating, they're not going to say to you, oh, hey, my ego's dead and now I'm a superior being. What they're going to do is they're going to hold out their hand and they're going to give you a hug, right?
Yeah.
Or
Right.
they're going to put their hand on their heart and they're going to say, it's so good to see you. And, the way that people who have truly integrated their experience show up, it's not something they say, it's something you feel on them.
Right. Yeah,
It's
they're just
not
exuding it from like every pore of their body. It's just like their aura clashes into you, and you're like, oh wow.
Absolutely. And maybe
Yeah.
after the fact, they'll come, they'll tell their story and how this happened to them. And, that's an important part of what it means to be impacted by these experiences. But, there's a reason why people who right after the experience want to make such an impact and such a change, it's not because their ego has died, it's because their ego is inflated by the ego death experience.
So
we had shamans on that were pretty much alluding to that as well. And it seems to be something that, and I think that's where we have to stress the integration, right? That's when it's important to say, no, the trip is the trip. This is what happened. Right. And some of it may be processed the wrong way.
Absolutely.
You know that commercial where the guy's like, it's a progressive commercial, I think, and he's like overlooking a stream and he's like, oh man, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
He's like, oh, I gotta get out of here before everyone finds it. And all of a sudden some girl behind
there's
him
a line behind him, hey, hurry up. Yeah.
Here's this place I randomly found, manifesting abundance. And I'm cracking up every time I hear it because it's like such like a tech bro, cliche. When you say ego death, and I know you mean it in the most like educational and inspirational.
She didn't say ego death. I said ego death.
But well, like, I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry. I might have.
I'm using the term incorrectly.
People use that term a lot, like that girl in the progressive commercial. I'm manifesting abundance. I'm like, the number of people who have said manifesting abundance or ego death and actually understand what those things mean, that delta, I would suspect, is enormous. It's like kind of like just saying the cool thing to say and yet.
Well, it's they're buzzwords, but I mean, we talk about that all the time on this show. It's like, this is part of the reason why I backed away from the term biohacking. It's part of the reason I don't like the fact that like all these Silicon Valley people are like, oh my God, this is my stack and this is what I do. Look, are you doing it to make yourself better? Are you doing it to be able to, is that your, rather than your Lamborghini in your parking garage, that's it, Right.
It's
the status symbol.
But just the question, right? How many people ask you when they find out you run a health podcast or Nikki, if you're in psychedelics, like, what's your, like, they ask me all the time, what supplements do you take? Like out of nowhere, like we're not even talking about supplements. There's nothing. Our conversation was about like pugs or something completely unrelated.
Or they'll tell you what they do. They're like, hey man, so I get up every morning at 5:30.
Yeah. And I'm like,
and I do a 20-minute ice bath. And I'm like, dude, I'm just an acupuncturist. Leave me alone. That's fine, man.
Right. So I want to come to this. I'm going to go use the bathroom and I'll be back in 1 minute. Is that okay?
All right, sounds good. Matt and I will entertain ourselves.
We're going to entertain ourselves, yes. We have never had a bio break on the show before. That's
a bio break. Is that the PC term now?
So, it's funny. I never knew this term before COVID went crazy, right? And so now all of a sudden it's everywhere I go, like, right? And I think it's the way of people saying like, hey, I got to take a piss really bad.
Am I too uncouth? Am I too crass? Where I'll just be like, guys, I got to take a shit. I'll be right back.
Well, even that, funny enough, even that, when you were a kid, did you ever come out in like mixed company, especially with girls in the room, and be like, I got to fart or I got to shit? No, I never.
No, absolutely not. You were terrified.
Absolutely never, right?
You're just like, I'll be right back, guys. I gotta make a call.
No, man, my son will be in our basement, which is pretty well equipped. It's got a couch, a bathroom, whatever.
Yeah.
He will be down there with girls, guys, everything. And he'll be like, come out of the bathroom. And he's like, don't go in there. I just took a massive shit. And I'm like, that's an interesting. Now, meanwhile, it's a Baltimore basement.
Personally, I think he's owning it. I mean, I don't know if that's such a bad thing.
No, I didn't say it was a bad thing. I just think it's a weird thing.
I feel like, and we've talked about this before with the younger generations, I think a lot of the hang-ups that maybe were put onto us as Gen Xers and the millennials are starting to, like, the next generation. We're like, oh, I'm not going to do that to my kid. Yeah.
Right.
Why should we be weird about it? We all do it. And if we don't do it, something's super wrong,
Yeah, for sure. But I do think it is funny because, you're right. It's better evolution to go and actually just be honest. I mean, look,
I'm a human being. I did a human being thing. Yeah.
Right. I did a human being thing.
Hello.
Nikki, you just spawned like a total conversation about bathroom breaks. And I just want to thank you. That was like a fun little interlude. I feel like we had a little sidebar.
We did.
Tell me.
We might have to do this all the time now. I can't wait to see what AI tells us about it.
Make people go, yeah. No, we were saying like, when I was a kid, the thought of like talking in mixed company, and I brought this up because my friend was not my friend nor my brother, my son was in the basement with a whole bunch of friends. And he comes out of the bathroom and he's like, don't go in there. I just took a massive shit. And I was like,
right.
Wow. When I was his age, I would have like held it until I had diarrhea coming out my nose before I brought that up in mixed company.
You're gonna wait till you're in the car with like two of your best friends and you're just gonna let one rip. Yeah.
Yes.
I would be like emergency room committed before I did that. And it's just funny. And in a lot of ways, that's a better evolution of society. Because like, look, that book in preschool, everybody poops. Right? Like,
yes.
Like it's,
I had the Spanish version, Todo hacemos caca, which is really, I was 25 when I bought that book, by the way.
That's fucking hilarious. It
was just too funny.
But you guys are alluding to a really good point that, we can criticize, modern society and modern education all we want, but we cannot deny the fact that they're absolutely addressing shame.
Yeah.
Well,
and flushing out shame more than we had. Absolutely.
So we touched on that earlier. Maybe this is actually a great re-entree to the conversation, but let's talk about that for a second. Cause I think shame is an underpin of start a list. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, it absolutely. And if you look back, the further back you go, the more prolific that shame lens was. I do think that us Xers are maybe like we were like the last like true shame born generation, and everybody since us is kind of
needed a song saying "fuck you, I won't do what you tell me" just to try and recover from that.
Yeah, right. We've been doing our own healing, right? Like, but like in a lot of ways, and I think this comes as to why a lot of Xers are like really confused by Zs or millennials or alphas, but alpha's a little too young yet. But for
I
sure,
don't know. They're doing some weird stuff, I gotta say.
I know,
like,
but
I'm not upset
they're too
about
young.
it.
They're kids still, right? Like you don't know if they're just goofy kids or if they're assholes, right? You just don't know. But I think
I think they're getting better.
A lot of that delta is because we just don't understand not being shamed. Like I don't understand going to work.
Yeah, Matt and I were actually talking like, hey, we didn't want to put any of that on our kids. So even the pretext of like organized religion, like I caught hell from my parents. And I basically said, oh, well, my wife was Methodist, so they're going to baptize the kids when they're older. I'm recovering Roman Catholic. And it was like, well, who's the godfather? I'm like, well,
We
I
don't
don't
have
know.
one.
Are you asking me who's going to watch my kids when I die, or are you going to make some? Are we talking about Sky Daddy asking who's going to take care of the kids when I get smited?
Right.
Smoted?
Yeah.
Right.
Smoted?
Smote.
Right.
Smote?
Yeah. Or this is like, or is it like a save the date for like sprinkling water on their foreheads, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
what's the deal?
So
Yeah.
if the
Yeah, I mean-
pedophile in the dress puts water on my kid's head, he goes to heaven?
Yeah,
Sorry.
right, exactly.
Right.
Send your hate
Yeah.
mail to
Yes.
Give the
But like,
address.
yeah,
Should we
Roman
throw out
Catholics,
the email address right now?
yeah, Roman Catholics certainly didn't invent shame, but they really made it.
Oh, they're so good at
it.
I mean,
They're so
fucking
good at
Oh my
ninjas.
gosh. I mean,
Yeah,
you know, any human being or organization that wants to elicit control,
Mhm.
fear and shame. That's it. Fear and shame. That's all you need. And the thing that's the most powerful is to convince a human being that what feels natural in their body is something they should be ashamed of. That is the fastest way to disconnect a human being from themselves and their intuition.
Nikki,
Because
that
our
was not
intuition-
Oh, sorry. Keep going.
No, that's
Keep going.
it.
No,
No.
I was going to say that is not a political statement right there, but it feels like it.
No, it does. It's definitely fitting for the
Mhm.
political atmosphere, but this is a statement about very specifically what it means to be a self in a body. And
Mhm.
that's my area. That's what I study. What does it mean to be an abstract object of our own minds and an embodied creature simultaneously? When we
But
create,
see, that's the part though that's
Yeah.
fucked up. Nobody is doing that. You know why? Because what it is to be in a body right now is to be able to go to the Chick-fil-A drive-through for dinner, and in the morning go to Burger King for the drive-through for breakfast, and like have Uber Eats deliver you everything from food to a hooker to your house. I mean, you can
Uber
be
Eats
lazy.
delivers hookers now?
Yeah, you
That's
can be
real
a
progressive,
lazy,
man.
self-righteous douchebag who never leaves the house ever, and that's totally well within reason in 2024, a la Homo sapien, right? Like,
so,
I mean,
so that's one direction, right? So what it means to be embodied is either that, right? Let me get what is like the fastest and most feel good things and makes me feel pleasure, right?
Mhm.
But then what we also have, that's I think going to be more under the microscope than it is now in the next 5 to 10 years, is all of the people that have realized that that is toxic, poison, and harmful. What happens is when we realize that, we don't go, okay, how do I find balance and sustainability? We go all the way to maladaptive control. We go all the way
why
to
is that? Why is that the default mode?
It's always an overcompensation because our ego is attached to it, right? So it's not just how do I balance out my physiology? It's how do I show and feel like the apex human being, right? So it's I need to do XYZ in the morning, my ice bath, my meditation, my blah, 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 right? And so it swings all the way to a hyper attachment to control, that it's not, oh, I'm a body. I'm going to age and perish, and I'm going to, have to learn how to be a body and experience all of that and accept all of that. It's what can I do to prevent that? What can I do to fix that and resolve that? It's all the game of the ego, whether it's a pleasure-based game that's all about indulgence or a control-oriented game that's all about prevention of what's inevitable. It's the same. It's two sides of the same coin.
So are you saying this ego, the control is from the rooted fear that we will die, or we either have to experience everything, or we have to protect ourselves from everything?
Absolutely. And it's an attachment. It's an attachment to the good, attachment to life, an attachment to feeling good, looking good, having people tell us we're good, having our lifestyle affirmed.
You mean TikTok? Is that what you're trying to say?
Absolutely.
I don't know, Matt. She
Yes.
might get me to break my 2,067-day meditation streak.
Wow.
No.
No. You're saying it's a control thing. I gotta give it up now.
But Nikki, is this also why we get things like, and I mean, there's no way of not making this political, but like in our current political, atmosphere, I always found it funny that the conservative minority came out and started picking things like transgender bathrooms, right? And like they pick these like topics.
They pick topics that don't affect a lot of people.
Well, yeah,
and the people that they're picking on statistically don't have the numbers to even fight back significantly.
But that's what I'm saying. Like,
it's an easy fight. Well, it's even the argument with abortion, right? What does a group of cells care whether or not it exists or not? So you're advocating for a group that doesn't need advocation for, Well, I'm sorry.
No. I guess
we're going to get so much hate mail.
Where I'm going with this, Nikki, is like when you is that prototype of that archetype of a human being, are they doing those things not because obviously common sense tells us that this is a statistically irrelevant fight, not that it tells us that it's like not something that matters to them, like this could be people that are separated by a continent from who they are, right? But it is sort of that if I can get transgenders to not use the bathroom, I've exerted that level of control that I need, that I feel now good. It's like that control is my fuzzy blanket. Is that,
or is this sociology now?
So yeah, I think more than anything, really, it's our attachment to the story, right? It's our attachment to the story we are told that bolsters and feeds our ego, right? So the Judeo-Christian story about, heterosexuality and men and women and, gender fluidity is gender dysphoria. It's a mental health illness. It's all in resistance to what is, for the sake of a story that's trying to be imposed on what is, right? So you can look at nature and say intersex and homosexuality and all of the above, pansexuality, polyamory, it's everywhere. It is everywhere in nature. It's everywhere in humanity. And instead of looking at what is and saying it's all natural because it's all happening, we say it's corrupt because it's against a story that we're told about what is natural. There's what's natural, it's observed, it just is, and there's a story about what's natural.
And that gets back to that shame and fear that you were talking about.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. That when we are taught very early that anything other than the story is bad and wrong and shameful, not only do we deny and suppress any of that within ourselves, but we feel this sense of this need for control over other people because it doesn't match the story, right? And we're told that the story is the most good, is the most holy, is the divine, right? And so when you're fed that kind of narrative, it makes sense. It makes sense that you would go out and protest a woman, having an abortion because you have been told this story that life is sacred and she's a murderer.
Right. But when I look at you bring up a point I'd love to kind of get your input on, because like when you look at things like what those foundations are built off, the Bible, right? The Torah, right? Like these things are written, millennia ago, right?
So they're written by God, Matt. They're written by God.
We suspend,
how dare you?
If we
they're the word of God. How dare you blaspheme on the show?
Yeah, but even if
there's my Satanic Temple membership right there, by the way.
Hilarious.
Sorry.
But like, we're all educated people on this call. We could look back at the creation of the Bible and see it as a marketing evolution, as it was, right? It was written and rewritten by centuries of people who rewrote it in whatever made them look the best. And eventually that slowed down. And eventually it stopped, right? We don't really get new versions of the Bible anymore. Or if we do, they're so underproduced that no one cares.
I think it was the Mormons that did it the last time.
But
Right.
already now you got this people following a book that like largely is nonsensical. And that's not just from I don't believe in the Bible. It's no, dude, this is actually anthropologically likely that they rewrote it to benefit themselves. Like, this is what history has taught us in every facet of history, right? So
Yeah.
in order for me to like get behind and I'm not disagreeing with anything you said. What I'm saying is like, follow this bouncing ball for a second, right? I believe in a Bible that we know we have to suspend logic 18 ways from Sunday to assume that that's got any veracity to it whatsoever. And then even so, now I'm basing my hatred of another human being who I don't know, I have nothing in common with, I will never meet, has nothing to do with my life in any way, shape, or form. But now I'm going to use this critically flawed evaluatory tool to then impose objectively shitty human behavior on another human being. And like, that's where for me, I was all out. Like, I can't, like,
Of course you're going to be. I mean, any person with the capacity to understand where that doctrine came from can very quickly feel a sense of intellectual and social and honestly it's kind of spiritual maladaptivity of that kind of text to apply it to your daily life. I think here we touch on something that really is fundamental to human nature, which really it's the root of so many things, which is just an inability to confront the possibility that you are just a speck of dust and that
Correct.
you are not a son or a daughter of some massive divine being that's going to protect you and bring you to the gates of salvation. You know, I think human beings are fundamentally desperate and quite honestly pathetic in our attempt to ameliorate and soothe our awareness of our mortality. And people will cling and cling and cling to whatever it is that allows them to believe that death is just not non-existence and darkness. And whether that's new age spirituality and you know, kind of more modern identifications of immortality, or this very old and outdated and really kind of primitive text about, you know, good and evil and holy and unholy. You know, they're all basically products and outputs and epiphenomena of human fear.
Interesting.
I mean, it makes complete sense. You know, I think, you know, so can I ask you just a personal question, maybe? Because I don't think no one can answer this. This is going to be a belief-based question. What do you think? What do you think the end is? Is it just, you know, you go back in the box and it's over? You know, I mean, what is, clearly none of us have come back. I don't know if you can, speak to that either from a psychology perspective, a philosophy perspective. I mean, you could pick a view, right? You know, but like, what is that? You know, if we get over that fear, then what are we expecting? I guess is maybe the question.
Well, I do think it's subjective. I do. I think let's put it this way. The most profoundly intelligent people throughout our history are people that at the end of their life have said, I don't know. And it's an unsatisfying answer, but I think it is the most representative of what it means to be truly intelligent and what it means to be truly a deep thinker. That if I said to you, either way, agnostic or atheist, or,
whatever you want
that,
to frame it as.
that I would be undoubtedly operating in ignorance and arrogance. And I think when we think about, when we're in the position of being asked this question, I think the most important thing to consider is that every single thing that we have ever experienced and ever observed and ever have learned is relative. And what that means is that
I love that, by the way.
everything is contingent upon something else. And that is the most fundamental feature of the universe that we know. That when we get to string theory, when we get to quantum mechanics, when we get to, massive macroscopic layers of cosmology and microscopic layers of quantum mechanics, we see that same trend. That is, every single thing exists in relation to something else. And that is, I think, the closest we can get to a concrete sentiment of what is at the end of a single human consciousness, is potentially the realization, the integration, the dissemination that we are not single in our conscious experience. Whether that looks like melting into an infinite darkness, or being, reacquainted with all of the connected points of our emotional consciousness that we've known in our human life. No idea.
Who knows? Yeah.
We have no idea. But I think it's very important, to come back to, and this is what, real deep thinkers do, is they say, how can we draw themes from one body of understanding to another body of understanding that are seemingly and historically antithetical to each other and in competition?
Wow.
And
I can't believe it's been 50 minutes already. I mean, I was like, wow, this is deep.
And it's funny because there's so many ways that we can, at the quantum level, we could take this conversation in so many different ways. And I think that's what I love about this topic in general, because when you start looking at the world at that quantum level, then you realize very quickly that my consciousness itself, to use your words, is relative to something else. Like my consciousness doesn't even exist if
without
not
every
for
other thing
things
in the universe. Yeah.
Right. Like,
absolutely.
and here's where I think we have a real we got a lot of work to do when it comes to the field of psychedelics. And I think it was almost disingenuous to frame this conversation on psychedelics, because it has something to do with psychedelics. But in general, this is really like a bigger level question for humans in general, right? And I love that people like you guys are doing this work, because if you look at what psychedelics do, they allow you to just, and I guess maybe to borrow some of your own terminology, like that fear of death, when you are using a compound, LSD, psilocybin, whatever, you could suspend that part long enough to actually do a little work in other areas, right? And depending on how strong that was for you to begin with, that actually could be very transformative by itself, right? Just giving you a runway to just not be fear. And I'm speaking from experience. I mean, I had panic attacks as early as high school about death. Like, it was this really big thing for me. Like, I remember actually funny, I was in my parents' waterbed. It's funny, they were 70s parents, they had waterbeds.
I had a waterbed growing up, man. I don't even know why.
I didn't realize how weird that was.
And they're great for your spine, and I'm like, well, all right, how come my back is jacked up now?
Everybody doesn't have one of these. So, but like, I remember being like young, like 5, 6, 7 young, being like, my grandfather had just died, and I sat in bed looking at the ceiling. I remember it like it was yesterday, freaking the fuck out, about what it was to die. And I think that like my whole life has been framed around that sort of moment. And I think one of the interesting things about the Hopkins lab, when they talk about how they treat these people with these massive problems, PTSD from rape or combat or whatever, they're literally kind of going back to that initial moment and they're kind of erasing that part. It's like Terminator style, right? Like if we go back far enough and just kill John Connor, like none of the rest of the shit happens, right? Like, and so like, I feel like getting rid of those sort of baggage points that prevent real meaningful growth is super good, but it's a real slippery, weird slope, right? Like it's not a straight line.
Right. And so here, again, we definitely touch into our attachment to the good, right? This is why would we want to erase the bad? It's because of our attachment to the good, and it's because of our resistance to the bad, right? Obviously those experiences cause lots of pain and malwiring and an inability to function and appreciate and enjoy life as it is, right? Because again, we have those top-down stories from the past imposing their stories onto the present, right? I think it's very important here to come back to the original, 2008 studies at Johns Hopkins where their primary population was that of terminally ill cancer patients. So these aren't patients dealing with past trauma. These are patients dealing with imminent death. And I think in a lot of ways, what those past traumas represent are forms of death, right? Death of innocence, right? Like you're talking about, Matt, 5, 6, 7 years old. Death of the capacity to think that life is fairy tales and rainbows and butterflies, but being confronted with the reality of what it means to be alive and what it means to be a human being, we're talking about the same thing. Right. And when we're processing trauma from the past, what we're doing is we're opening up a window of opportunity and malleability to approach that trauma the way that it should have been approached, right? That we should have always had the tools societally to provide to people to begin with, right? Is to see that trauma as pain and suffering that is totally unmediated and unattracted and unwelcomed by the individual, and to process that as a fundamental feature of what it means to be alive and be a human being. The gazelle hopping around in the wild didn't attract the lion biting its ass to death, right? It's just that's what happens in nature. And I think it's the same kind of coping that has to happen with past trauma and with future death. It's an acceptance. Right? It's an acceptance with the fundamental duality of life, that it is to embrace the moments and experiences of the good and freedom of health and longevity, and to experience and embody the pain and the grief and the suffering that comes as a necessary duality to that. And I think that's what it means to be self-actualized and then self-transcendent, right? Is to see that full picture of what it means to be an animal, and an animal that is aware of its future and its past.
Yeah, and I think you've touched on a lot of things that given me a lot of reason to pause here, and one of them being that you're absolutely not incorrect. Like, my desire to do this show and everything backwards from that is really all rooted in that sort of like, well, I really don't feel like dying. So if I can do little things to make that go further down the line, I'm going to do it. But here's a funny thing. And here's my question to you. If you obsess over those details long enough and you wake up one morning and you realize I've actually changed me. Like, I've done enough micro movements because of my fear that I am now in a new space where I show up differently to new meetings. I show up differently to clients or friends that disagree with me. Like, I just show up differently. That's not to say I'm not a giant asshole if somebody pisses me off. I am. Because that's also happened, by the way. I'm so clear on what I deem okay and acceptable that when you are out of those bounds and you are acting like an asshole, like, I am unapologetically an asshole back. I'm like, look, man, if you're going to like kill club baby seals and try to vote for abortion laws, I can't fucking be your friend. I'm sorry. We have to cut this off. Like, you know, like I'm not like,
Right.
I'm not going to be your friend. I know you're a lovely human being, but I'm not down with the baby seal thing.
Right.
I will say my older daughter's like, anything you don't like is fascist, huh? And I'm like, well, it's pretty much.
Yeah,
I don't like fascism. I really don't like fascism. Yes,
right.
I don't really.
Right.
But like,
right.
but eventually you might just become like enlightened by accident if you work at it hard enough, right? Like, I mean, you know, like if you just keep changing little
Struck
things,
by
I feel
lightning.
like, yeah.
No,
I mean, I don't want to be
hear your
reductive
point.
in that statement,
No,
but I mean,
I hear that. Well, I mean, I think maybe what's really important to bring forward here is that fear of death is perhaps the most adaptive thing we have ingrained in our body, right?
Mm-hmm.
Fear of death is what keeps us alive, and that is not maladaptive at all. It becomes maladaptive when that is not paired with honest and open existential contemplation and the resolve of existential paradox, that we can strive for a long, healthy life. But when we are not doing that with contemplations of death, and we're not doing that with contemplations of impermanence, I mean, Buddhism 101, right? We lose an immense amount of presence and gratitude because we're just controlling and clinging.
But even gratitude, right? That's another one of those douchey like tech bro things, like gratitude journals.
I have a gratitude journal. Yeah,
I do. And you know what? When I stopped using it, when I realized that I was only using it for the streak and not actually
to be actually grateful.
Gratitude.
So,
right.
so
like,
you know, I have a question about like kind of this critical mass, because clearly, you know, so few people on the planet are concerned and getting back to Maslow, right? Some people are just trying to like make sure they don't die because they can't find food or shelter. And here we are with our privilege talking about existential crises and how do we get closer to enlightenment? Is there, you know, I remember this book, Power versus Force, right? And the guy made some weird claims there, but he had this logarithmic equation of consciousness, right? And when you get to a certain level, right? And he did some kinesiology testing. I was 6 books in and he started singing Bill O'Reilly's praises. But he wrote the book before Bill O'Reilly sexually assaulted a bunch of women that he worked with. You know, and he's like, that guy has a no spin zone. But anyway, you know, the idea was if we get to this certain critical mass on the planet where we are all having, or a certain percentage of us, we're having these conversations about enlightenment, about consciousness, about how do we clean the ocean? How do we make our lives better for everybody? You start tipping that scale in a way where it just kind of naturally flows. And now you have, rather than like one Buddha every 1,000 years or one Christ, you have a population of people that are vibrating in that sage sainthood thing, that are literally lifting all these other people merely by existing. I don't even know where I'm going with this, but it was such a weird kind of way to think about it, because like here I'm reading this book going, what did 50 people read this book? 1,000 people read this book? And is it going to change anybody after they read it? You know? I don't know. I have no idea where to go with that. I'm sorry. It's just a weird thing that popped into my head.
No, I think, you know, I think it is important to look at the impact of the age of information on our capacity as a human race to evolve and address where the primitive nature of dominance has screwed us all, you know, very crudely put. But I think, you know, when you look at historically who are these kind of divine saviors of humanity, those are people, you know, sapient animals who are so clearly antithetical to what we in modern society idealize, right? We idealize the powerful, the famous, the rich, the people who are the biggest egos we can possibly, put on the pedestal. And I would love to embody that optimistic perspective that, with more information and more awareness, we'll be able to uplift more people that, can raise that vibration and can go beyond, the primitive ego. But I think what we're seeing is not that. I think what we're seeing is a more and more investment. Really, it's very sad, but with social media and the addiction to social media by the masses, we are seeing, the representation of the ego in the most high, inflated, and fattest forms being the most rewarded.
Yeah, and I think that plays perfectly psychologically into what you were talking about earlier, is if people are afraid of demise or not inspecting that, then the opposite reaction to that is a hyperinflated ego, which, by the way, we happen to have TikTok right here waiting for you. You can just fucking, so, like it's like, oh, are you jonesing? Here's some heroin. Take it and go do something.
Oh my gosh.
You know what I mean?
Even,
like it's,
and our obsession, and I can speak definitely, I mean, I'm sure this is the case for, the cisgendered male population, but for women, we are so deeply obsessed and infatuated by these women that we see that don't age, right? They're not aging, right? They're using whatever supplemental, medical interventions to just not age. And we're obsessed with it. It's a fixation, and men are obsessed with that as well. How does the 60-year-old woman look like she did 30 years ago? Right? And so it's perpetuating that same obsession and clinging to life without examining what it is that we're doing in that process and what it means to do that, to obsess over and devote our attention to people that are so resistant and clinging so hard to their life, their youth, and their power. And instead of looking at that and going, oh my God, that's so sad. That's so sad for that person, that they're so desperate, that instead we go, how do I get that? How do I get that money? How do I get that, opportunity and that privilege to prevent my own aging? Right. And to show the world that I can do that. I can stop my, it's sick. It's a sickness.
But what's so, but again, this goes back to the core. So this is all great to understand the why it's happening, and we can peel this apart through your lens. But I think this all comes back to something that we see over and over again, no matter what we're talking about. Like, unless you are Herculean effort towards overriding what's all around you all the time. And we see this with diet. We see this with like toxic work. We see this with, like jumping on a bandwagon on a Facebook group about hating some group or another, right? Like, I mean, we see this over and over and over and over again, right? You know how you don't become a neo-Nazi from watching Facebook? You just fucking don't pay attention to the fucking idiot neo-Nazis. That's it. Like, but we know how psychologically these things work, the relational algorithm and how like the social media stuff goes together.
Right.
The only cure for that, is to just not fucking do it. Like, that's it. And if you can't do it, there's a really, really, really fucking funny Bob Newhart thing online called Stop It. If you've never heard of this, Google it and fucking listen to it.
That's ancient.
It's ancient, but it might be the funniest like 4 minutes of the entire 80s. He basically, the gist of it was basically he's a psychiatrist and a woman comes in and he goes, my fee structure is simple. It's $5 and you pay in cash. I don't give change. And he's like funny, Bob Newhart. And he goes basically like, you tell me your problem and I'll just tell you how to stop it, and I'll tell you how to fix it. And she's like, oh, this sounds great, whatever. So she says, like, I have this fear of being buried in a box. alive in a box. And he's like, he hears her whole thing out. He goes, all right, you ready? And she goes, yeah, oh, yeah. She pulls out a notebook. She's like, do I have to write? He goes, you don't have to write this. It's only 2 words. And she's like, okay. And he goes, stop it. Just stop it. And I'm fucking rolling. And she's like, I don't like this at all. He goes, okay, well, stop it. And it's like funny, but it's because, and I use this example for my kids, friends, colleagues, everything, because at the end of the day, like that kind of is the cure for a lot of shit. You just have to not do it. And that's a terrible answer, right? Like it's a terrible answer. It's not, as they say, setting you up for success.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways there is a lot of like very crude validity in that, right? What we give attention to becomes our reality. I think when it comes to extremism and polarization and ingesting things that are essentially leading us into a dangerous kind of groupthink, we're already too addicted and compulsive to stop it. So I think what's more important, and this goes not just for social media, it goes for our own consciousness and how we speak to ourselves and our inner experience, that if we can just ask and create enough room to just ask, what else? It's not about preventing something. It's about allowing something and then being able to ask, what else? Right? When we hear something and our fears and our shame and our identity latches onto it so much, that's how we get polarization, because we take it and we go, that's it. That's the truth. That's what makes me feel good. I feel on top. I want more of that. If we can learn to say, but what else and what more? That's where we can bring in more data. We're going back full circle to the, what it means to have novel outputs, what it means to have a creative mind. It means acknowledging that your consciousness can open at any point, that you have the capacity at any point to ask, what else? Am I so desperate in this moment to just take and cling and accept and repost or do I have enough pause and space to ask what else? That's how we change our algorithms on social media. That's how we change the software of our conditioning of our consciousness. It's by pausing and creating enough space to ask what more and what else. Because it's there that you feel and actually experience autonomy. You don't have to be determined by anything external.
But when you say that, like I love it, because I'm like, yeah, check. I'm doing that. I love that. And I'm doing that because I'm like, look, I love that there's somebody else that thinks along these lines. What I realize though is that you can't ask what else in a drive-through line at McDonald's doom scrolling TikTok. Like you just can't. You're not allowing for space to occur. And as somebody said on the show, I forget who said it, but they were like, you can never be too comfortable. Like there's no such thing in the human condition.
That was the founder of Sense8.
Yeah. He said like, yeah, that's right. There's no such thing as too much comfort, right? So nobody's ever going to be like, people could be like, hey, I've had enough steak for tonight. Thank you. I don't need more. Right. Like I've gone to the buffet enough. I'm full. I'm
yeah.
done. No one's ever going to say, I'm too comfortable. Please stop making me more comfortable. Right. And if we have things that are algorithmically, surgical in their attack, the only way to like get out of it is to either shut it off, which is impractical because let's face it, our interpersonal communication has been largely outsourced to digital media, like in all of its various forms. So turning it off isn't an option, right? You can't really do that. So you're left with either creating the space of your own personal growth and asking what else enough where you don't actually fall into that. But let's be honest, If the world just keeps making me more comfortable, I don't fucking care. Like, I'm not going to ask those questions. I'm not going to seek a better answer. I'm not going to try to create space.
Okay, I see that. I'm
playing devil's advocate
no,
here.
No, I hear you, and I see that in a good portion of the population. But Matt, I think the presupposition that you can never have too much comfort is fundamentally false, and I'll tell you why. Whenever human beings are too comfortable or born in comfort, what do we see from people that are born in comfort? We see self-induced and self-inflicted pain. Pain and self-punishment and self-sabotage, addiction. We see that because whether we like it or not, the human spirit thrives on feeling alive. Comfort doesn't really make us feel alive. Comfort is a coping response to being afraid of feeling alive. So people will get comfortable and die in comfort. That's true. Some people will do that because, to your point, that's true. Some people will think there's never enough comfort. I want to die on my couch, fat and happy, and, that's it for me. But I think when we look at neurobiology, when we look at, history, I think what we see more of is the human spirit thriving and feeling the most alive in the mastery of adversity and the mastery and resilience of overcoming challenges and pain. And that's why I think you see people, even now, right, on social media, I get, things all the time popping up of like, get off your screen, right? Here are ways to disengage from social media.
Ironically, being delivered to you from the screen.
Yes,
I want to say
social
this.
media.
You are talking, I believe it was the second Matrix, where he finally gets to the guy that created the Matrix, and he said, "Yeah, we tried making everybody happy all the time. You started killing yourselves."
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, look at I don't mean this, in any kind of overly reductionist or overly simplified way.
I normally do.
But you look at the young population and the young generation going, okay, you have all your fast food, you have all your social media, you have, a TikTok career in the bag, but they're all depressed and they're all suicidal. And the reason why we see such a terrifying number of suicides in young people, I don't think it's because, life is so hard. I think it's because their immediate life is so comfortable and the fictitious life and the story in the mind is horrifying. And that's the story and the experience that they're being fed on social media and TikTok. I did an experiment. I never had TikTok. I created one a couple months ago. Some of the clients that I work with are talking about the impact it has on their mental health. I specified no interests, no algorithms, nothing. I specified nothing. And what I got was, recordings of horrifying 911 calls and then an ad. Right. And then, something for self-help and then something about death and cancer and suicide. It's all extremism all over the place, whether it's about politics, it's about sickness and life and death and health. It's a potent, loud microcosm of all of the unprocessed human experience being spewed out back to you. You can't confront it, so you go on social media and you experience it through this fictitious medium, and then it gives you some false sense of safety. But really, what ends up happening is then you're going to sleep, and then you can't fall asleep, and then you're anxious, and your body's all ramped up, and then you wake up and you do the same thing over and over again.
Right.
And it's unnatural. It's just unnatural to be so safe and so comfortable in the bubble of our boxes, but looking at all of the adversity and travesty and horrifying things happening all around us, that is the most disease-ridden path to, well-being experience. It's never gonna, no one is gonna be able to access real full well-being when we have that disconnect.
So that's an interesting take on that, because we've actually had quite a number of sort of conversations, both on and offline, in the other direction, and I really appreciate being able to look at that from the other way, because it's just an interesting way to flip it around. Because I look at it. I'm a computer guy. I'm a technology guy, right? And so when I read the book Chaos Theory, or the Chaos Machine, right? About the social media algorithm and stuff. That book was interesting because they said, when a human recognizes oh, look, this kind of headline people responded to, so I'm gonna juice that up a little bit. I'm gonna go down this direction. When you're looking at it from a computer standpoint, they are ninjas. It ramps up real fast, because they can kind of get real surgical with how they word this. And what they realized was that more is definitely better, right? And so when I look at, and I've brought this up a million times, so anyone who's listened to more than 2 shows is sick of me hearing me say this, but the duck lip sideways Instagram pose is just a grotesque misunderstanding of photographic principles that got amplified in a social environment, where somebody said, oh, I heard a photographer say that if you turn your shoulder to the camera, it makes you look thinner. And instead of this, now they're like this, and it's completely sideways. And I'm like, well, you just didn't understand what you were trying to do there, and now it looks ridiculous. That's where I think we are with algorithms. The algorithms work because we're ridiculous. We misinterpret everything now. And I just think that's really hard to overcome. Where we're at, how do you get out of that cycle? It's I view that very glass half full, or half empty. Sorry. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I think when it comes to, our relationship with social media, we have to understand that what we're seeing and what we're experiencing when we're on social media, we're not actually experiencing what we're seeing. We're experiencing what our heuristic, predictive mind is believing that we're seeing, right? And so that's what you're alluding to, this kind of this quick-natured processing through this content. And I think in a lot of ways, this Instagram, TikTok, X, whatever these mediums are, they are capitalizing on this very automated heuristic system that we have. And the more that people, influencers, companies, whatever, can understand neuroscience and understand psychology, the more
because they're taking the same classes you did, right? They're
absolutely, and more and more.
They're hiring people just like you to come in here and be
the field, the industry of attention. That's what social media is. It is the industry of human attention. How much can I absorb a single human being's attention? That is the most dangerous objective for any kind of capitalistic company.
Well, let me ask you something here then. We are where we are. None of us on this call certainly can change that. But given what you know, and sort of given what we're talking about here, could we look at where we are as sort of the dark ages preceding the Renaissance of what self is? Or are we sort of still in a sort of a downward spiral on this, and we haven't really quite figured out we might have lost self altogether at this point? Which side of that story do you think we are heading towards? Or it's just a general comment on that thought?
General, right? I think it's multifold. I think as individuals, we are being more and more isolated with the facade of connection.
I 100% agree. Yeah.
Right. So I think at the individual level, that's what's happening. And then we're,
But is that
compulsive,
facade
addicted,
meaningful? Like, are you aware of it and ignore it? Are you unaware of it and just accept it as a false truth?
I think you're just sick. I think it's just,
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
I think it just manifests in sickness and depression, anxiety, OCD, social anxiety.
Right. I see.
And I think I think people are largely unaware of that.
Yeah. Correct.
I think at, the scientific and psychological level, meaning in those fields, I think neuroscientists, Ramon Cajal, the founder of neuroscience, I can't remember the exact quote, but he says something like, as long as consciousness is a mystery, so will the universe be. And I think I have that perspective as well. I think the more that we understand about self, the more that we understand about our relationship with reality. Because the more that we understand about self, I learned this very quickly on in my area, in my field, that this is a filter, that the self and our experience of reality is a filter. It is secondary to reality. It's a process that has thousands of mechanisms that all happen in 1 second or less. And that is that's our entire existence is happening in ignorance to all of those fundamental processes underpinning our awareness of any present moment. And I think as we move closer to understanding our blind spots, all of the information that gets filtered out, everything that we are unaware of in our consciousness, the closer we get to understanding reality. And I think that's the same for individual growth as well. The more that we are aware of our blind spots and what we don't know and what gets filtered out, the more that we can get on the driver's seat and become autonomous and change that filter.
You know what I love about what you said? We just had a guest last week on who said, Joshua said, there's no meaning in life except the meaning we give to it. And this was talking about every individual thing. And what I have also found, being very privileged to be able to have all these very cool conversations, is that no matter what view of the world we have or which direction we're coming at problem solving, that we all are fundamentally grappling with some, we can call them universal truths, right? Like, life is life. It is without interpretation because it exists with or without my interpretation. But the best I can do is assign meaning to certain things. But where my personal desire is, and this is where I think that volition comes back in, my personal desire is to work to assign meaning only through as cognitively clear a lens as I possibly can at any given point. Meaning I want to make decisions for clear, thought out reasons that serve a broader ecosystem, not just a solution to the problem. Like the proverbial sort of lead a horse to water kind of thing, right? Or teach a man to fish, right? Kind of thing, right? It's like, I'm not saying this about any one solution problem type thing. I'm talking about just in general, every decision you make. And I tell my kids, like, laugh at me every time I say this. I said, kids, let's move with intention. Let's go. Right. And I use that phrase a lot because it's how I distilled this. It's like, no, a well-actualized human is moving with intention. What does that mean? It means that what you're doing was fucking planned. Like, it was planned with input variables that led to cognition, that led to an output, not just this is what comes next because that's just what feels right. Right. And so when my wife yells at me all the time about, making fun of these people that live in their cars driving around the country, like, they're like, well, maybe that's just them living their best self. I'm like,
hey man, haven't we interviewed a couple of people that have done that?
Yeah. And I'm like, listen, if they're doing it with intention, great. But the people I talk to who have done that They're doing it because they can't afford to pay rent in an apartment. And those are different journeys, right? Like we're not talking about the same path, right?
Yeah.
It's got the same feeling-ish output, but it's certainly not the same thing. And that intention is the differentiator, right? That intention is the thing that says this is letting circumstance be your North Star, and this is letting intention be your North Star.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. I think so. The first thing I'll touch on is the sentiment about meaning. Meaning is always subjective, always, always, always. And that's not just, human meaning making, right? I mean, it's meaningful to the squirrel that another squirrel, buried its hole, right? Or it can't get its acorns,
Sure.
right? Whether that story is cognitive and language, developed is a whole other, conversation. But meaning, this is where I think, human beings and in my field of cognitive psychology, this gets kind of lost a little bit. We have a hubris as human beings that meaning is a story. And I think when it comes to our experience, yes, that is what meaning is. But I think meaning is something that can also just be assigned to cause and effect, right? It's meaningful to the star that the black hole's horizon is expanding, right? Or that there's meaning is relative, right? And so we come back to, again, the fundamental kind of reality that everything is relative, and what is meaningful to something is relative to another thing. And
yeah, I love how you brought that back around. That's totally
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think let's put it this way. There are people that, choose to go busking in London who have, billionaire parents or millionaire parents who decide to, let go of their privilege or whatever to experience a kind of raw and unfiltered life, a life that's not handed to them. And I think, again, it goes back to our idea of comfort. There's this notion that, like you're saying, Matt, people who live without plan are living without intention. I think the majority of people we see who are living without intention are running. Absolutely, I think you're right. Are running from some kind of sense of, expectation or responsibility and the discipline that they're not willing to cultivate to get there. I think that's true. But I think there, again, human beings are drawn to spontaneity, surprise, novelty. And when we live a life that's so predictable and controlled, we don't leave enough room for that. And our life can become, even if it's pleasant, can become boring. We might be living till we're 120, but it's lacking something fundamental to the human spirit.
When I'm 120, we'll be on show like 9,000, and so, like I'll just keep having these. Nikki, I mean, everything I mean, we could have like literally 7 shows about this. I mean, it's really it's awesome. I mean, it's really hard to not have you back, but I unfortunately we're gonna have to put a fork in this because you definitely have won the prize for the longest in a while. But but I love when we have this problem, because that means like shit was just blowing up everywhere.
Absolutely.
And I'm just like, yeah, I love it, man.
So happy to be here.
Let's get to the brief interlude of marketing for yourself. Where can people find you? I want to make sure we tell people how to do that. Like,
oh, that's a great question. Nowhere.
Nowhere. So don't reach out. She doesn't want to.
No, I have like a social media. It's not really active. It's hard. I mean, you can find me on Instagram, Dr. Nicole Amada. It's something I started a few months back, really. I'm very new to it, but most of what I do in my career is not online. It doesn't have anything to do with social media. It's all connection based, word of mouth based. You know, that's how it happened. That's how it started.
No, and we'll talk about that another time, but I love your story with business. Like Tom, she basically skipped the whole academic route and just went right to like, no, I'm just going to work with people and solve.
That's cool.
Yeah. I did the PhD, but I never, you know, it wasn't a licensure program. It just happened, you know, and I think really like I would love for, you know, people to reach out to me to have good conversation and to continue stuff like this and to be on more podcasts. I think would be super fun. But as far as my work goes, I'm not really on the market.
Not really on the market. I love it.
Well, if you want more conversations, reach out to me after. I have a contact that can help you with that with podcasts.
Absolutely. I love doing this. This is amazing.
Nikki, I hope you answer our email when we have you back, because like Tom, I don't know about you, but I mean, this
was a deep one, man. This was definitely, I'm going like, oh God, I don't think we should get high. Like, I don't know. This would have been a 12-hour episode.
Yeah, that no one would have understood. Totally. Yeah.
I'm like, you know, I was looking at research, right? Statistics, right? We're trying to get this thing busy, and it's like, you have 45 minutes. And I'm like, oh, fuck. We're going to cut this into 2. We'll stop at the bathroom break. We'll pick up after the bathroom break, and we're going.
But man, Nikki, thank you so much.
Thank you guys. I had such a great time. This was awesome.
Hey, Nikki, hold on. I gotta ask this one completely on your guitar stand. You've got something with a handle. I don't believe it's sexual, but I need to know what it is. I'm sorry, I'm that OCD.
She's like,
I've been staring at that for the last half an hour. And it's messing me up.
She's like, it is in fact sexual.
It's an instrument. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, look at that.
There we go.
This is a handmade, like, cymbal shaker.
Interesting. You made this, or somebody else?
No. This is a gift, actually, from a friend of mine. She went to Peru, and she brought this back.
It's very pretty.
Is that a ritual device?
I think it is. I think it's something that they use in, you know, the shamanic celebrations.
Sure.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Thank you, because that one, I would have been like trying to get in touch with you just to ask you, like, and that would have been super weird.
Like, what the hell was that thing? That's so funny.
Yes, I appreciate that. It's a weird one. Yeah.
Oh man. All right, Nikki.
All right. Well, we're definitely having you back. We're definitely having you back.
We'll definitely
absolutely
have you back.
Yeah. Email me at any time.
Enjoy the evening, guys.
Yeah. Take care.
You too.
Take care.
Bye.
Be subversive, irreverent.
Health is wealth, but you knew that.
Everybody knows that.
But so is following us on social media at Irreverent Health. And check out our website for more exclusive content at irreverenthealth.com.
Oh, I like this.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of Irreverent Health.